Okay, and we're back with another video discussion of American Government Chapter 16 now on domestic policy. And again, make sure we're asking questions and all these things, and be sure to read. We're starting to get to the end of our discussions here. So I have, I think, one more American Government chapter to do and a couple more California chapters to do. This is probably the most pointless picture of all of our pictures I put in. This is just two people shaking hands, and this is behind in front of an American flag, and then to me, it's just domestic policy. So oftentimes we'll call this again public policy, and there's a lot of things that you guys should all be able to relate to, I think, in this reading. So what is public policy? How do different areas of policy differ, and what roles do policy analysts play in all of this, right? What programs does national government currently provide, and how do budgetary policy and politics operate? This is from 598. So again, here we have this term public policy. So again, domestic policy are policies that affect us domestically or within the country, whereas international policy affect us outside the country in our relationships with other places around the world. Let's see. Public policy, this concerns the process of making domestically aimed social and political objectives. This process is difficult because society has various and competing interests. Additionally, there are multiple potential solutions to solve shared social problems. Further adding to the difficulty of public policy is determining what exactly the role of government ought to be. Another little typo in addressing these problems. Let me save that for myself. Sorry, guys. Okay, so again, like politics plays a role, and again, even though we might agree that there's a problem, that we might disagree on how to solve it, and again, one of these things that happens in public policy and domestic policy is oftentimes people disagree if there's a problem at all. And again, I won't get into like some of the specifics with regards to much of the kind of current protest movements and things like that, but again, part of that animus, difficulty, disagreement is that people are disagreeing that there are problems or how to solve those problems. So it's important, meaning public policy. It is important. So the PP here, if you forgive my juvenile humor, it stands for public policy. Public policy helps to guide legislative action over time. Policy outcomes are debated over whether they're good or bad or they're working or not. Citizens and politicians work to build consensus or kind of like an agreement in order to act in the best interest of the most people. So they're going to have to compromise when they make these policies. Public policy are refined by multiple institutions and interest groups. So we just had this discussion on the bureaucracy, and so that's how what's going to filter, carry out, and find the best solutions for public policy to work. So again, I have public policy to get primary test scores up. How do I do that? That we can all agree we want people to be smarter, to be able to answer tests better. But what's the best way of doing that? Hiring more teachers, paying teachers more, having secondary educational opportunities like, say, tutors that are going to help people get better scores. I don't know, right? What's the best way of doing that? Public policy can also be thought to occur when government refuses or fails to act as well. So sometimes the government's going to say, our policy is going to be to not do something. Congress, the executive branch, and the judiciary can all impact public policy. So again, when you're doing your readings, know how and know examples given in the book of how each one can affect public policy. So that's up to you guys to do that reading. Public policy is oftentimes ultimately implemented by the bureaucracy itself. See Chapter 15. An ever-present worry is that of unintended consequences. So again, a lot of times people want to fix. They want to fix now. But then problems arise. And so, like, if we want responsible leaders, they're going to say, hey, hold on, I don't know how this is going to work out. But then again, people want solutions now. Our social media kind of driven society wants things fixed now. So you get tested on this. I think the book does a fair job of discussing people who are left-leaning, or what we might call in contemporary parlance liberals, and conservative, or people who tend to be more right-leaning. This goes back to our party discussion, but generally people who are more left-leaning think you can use more government to solve problems. People who are more right-leaning tend to think government is not the source of solving problems. It creates more problems. And so that's it. I don't think there's any need for animus or hatred, but that's the difference. And sometimes one side's right, sometimes they're both right, sometimes the other side's right, sometimes they're both wrong. That's politics. Modern liberals tend to feel very comfortable with the idea of government shepherding progressive social and economic reforms, believing that these will lead to outcomes more equitable and fair for all members of society. But again, remember, we don't always want that to be the case, like in the case of disabled people. So this is what we have. Equitable might mean appropriate inequalities and not having irrelevant inequalities, right? Conservatives, on the other hand, often find government involvement onerous and overreaching. They feel society would function more efficiently if oversight of most public matters were returned to the private sphere, from 394. Here I have a picture of Captain America from the Marvel movies that have come out. And so again, this is the example I've used throughout the course, like Thor's hammer. So again, if government's a tool that we use, an instrument, people who are more left-leaning and more modern liberals, they tend to think of this tool as something that helps to build and helps to create things, it helps to solve problems. Or if you're more right-leaning and you're more conservative, you see the hammer as something being destructive that causes problems. But it's the same thing, right? So it just depends on the circumstances. And so I actually got that analogy from the very first Thor movie, where Odin says that to Chris Hemsworth, right? He says you can use this hammer to destroy, but you can also use it to build. So again, the same tool is how I'm thinking of government. Just kind of apt that Captain America is holding the hammer there. These ideological commitments impact how individuals view goods and how they ought to be used, right? So review different types of goods. The book discusses. So there are private goods, so like my mouse, my computer is my own private good. Public goods are like, college and desert, the whole campus belongs to the public. Common goods and toll goods. So you want to make sure you know the difference of those. Are key terms to know. The problem with public and common goods is that since no one owns them, no one has a financial interest in protecting their long-term or future value. Without government regulation, a factory owner can feel free to pollute the air and the water, since he or she will have no responsibility or direct responsibility, right? So we all kind of own the air. Actually, the whole world kind of owns the air, not just America. We all kind of own the land of America, and so you might litter, but that's going to have consequences for you and your neighbors, right? Public policy boils down to determining distribution, allocation, and enjoyment of public, common, and toll goods in society. While specifics of policy often depend on the circumstances, two broad questions all policymakers must consider are A, who pays the cost of creating and maintaining a good, and B, who receives the benefit of the good. So again, like one of the questions like that we're going to talk about right now, say with social welfare and social security, is that many of the policies that people are doing now are going to affect me and especially you guys in the future. And is that fair, right? So are you going to have to pay more for social security to keep working in the future? Makes it hard, right? So people now don't want to get the negative effects of changing, so they want the benefit, and they're going to pass the buck to you in 30 or 40 years to have to pay for these things. So social welfare policy. Much of it has been developed in this country after the 1930s as a result of the Great Depression, right? So, all these kind of economic things and people just needing help for, say food. I need food stamps, I need EBT card, so these are things you have to kind of consider. Otherwise, I wouldn't have delicious food to eat every day. Welfare policies, along with arguably providing political stability, can also serve as a source of economic stimulus. So again, that just happened with the COVID stuff in the beginning of 2020, where they just gave a lot of people a $1,200 check to kind of keep everything kind of running. Here's a picture of an actual Social Security card of this fellow, John Q. Public, I think it says. Looks like an O. Hopefully you have one of those. The oldest and largest social welfare program in the United States is then Social Security. So this is essentially like a state-run kind of retirement plan. That's not a lot of money, so many of you are probably going to want to have your own retirement, but you will all eventually qualify, depending on the job you have, for Social Security. My dad was in the public sector, so he didn't qualify for Social Security. So not everyone. So we all pay into the system, but not everyone's going to collect the benefits. It's kind of how it works. So it's paid for through payroll taxes on wages. So if you guys look at your check, enough if you're working, some of your check goes to Social Security, and it'll usually stay on your check. Provides citizens that work retirement benefits, and there are also disability, unemployment benefits that we're paying into, right? And so an important class note, but there's a serious problem, right? So know this. Not enough people pay into the system, this meaning the Social Security system. In the 1950s, there were 16.5 people paying into the system for every one person collecting benefits. But then all those people came back from World War II and Korea and started having kids. And so now there are just more people than there were then. So as of 2013, so obviously there's probably more people now. There are less people paying, I should say, more people retiring. There are roughly 2.8 people paying into the system for every person collecting benefits. So it's just not sustainable. There's not enough people paying into the system. And so you will hear politicians talk about this all the time, especially during times like now in 2020 election years. the Social Security system is going bankrupt because not enough people are paying into it. There are not enough people paying into the system to cover the increasing number of retiring persons of the baby boomer generation, right? So obviously you guys know this from out in the, if you're listening to this in the Palm Desert region, because you have all those snowbirds that come in during the wintertime. Major reform, which is a politically difficult as it gets, will be needed in our immediate future if the system is to continue to function. So other important entitlement programs, so things you're entitled to when you become of a certain age, right? So you get it. So I need food stamps. I'm entitled to it because I don't make enough money. And our country says, okay, if you don't make enough money, you fill out the paperwork, you can get EBT card, right? Medicare and Medicaid, right? So Medicare is for retired persons. Medicaid is if you're a poor person and can't afford insurance. The government also provides financial support to other areas of the economy, such as agriculture and energy sectors. Budgeting and tax policy, right? So the federal budget for 2016 was $3.8 trillion. Important to note is that some policy functions are outside the reach of Congress, as some programs are required to be funded by law. So this is really, really, really important. Make sure you know the difference between mandatory spending and discretionary spending. So Social Security, regardless of whether the Congress is arguing or the president's arguing about what gets funded, will always be funded. The money that the country collects in terms of taxes, the Congress has already said, like, this is going to go to Social Security. Where they have discretionary spending or things that can be variable. So the defense, the military is part of discretionary spending. The government can change the amount of funding that the defense apparatus of this country requires. By the end of 2015, the national budget was $19 trillion. As of April of 2020, it was 24. I think now it's almost like 27 with all this kind of COVID spending. So we're just going up and up and up, right? So we owe a lot of money here. We borrow this money. China owns a lot of this debt. That's why the whole China stuff is interesting. So what does that mean? They basically loan us the money to pay for our debts. So imagine you're borrowing money to pay for your credit card. It's not the best. So it's like owing money on money you owe. Yeah, problem. Key terms, right? Progressive tax and regressive tax. So again, this is the end of the notes. Make sure you review this. Progressive taxes are kind of like income tax. The more money you make, the more tax you're going to pay. Regressive tax are things that everyone gets charged the same. They're called regressive because they impact people who are poor more. So an example of a regressive tax is going to be your paying gas tax. So when you go pay for gas, even if I show up in a Lamborghini and I'm very rich, I pay the same amount of tax that you pay in your minivan or whatever, right? So it's regressive because me, the rich person, can afford, the extra unleaded, whereas you have to do like the basic 87 octane because you're poor. Yeah, so that's it. That's the note on domestic policy. Again, there's way more here. There's more ins and outs in this chapter. Please make sure you're reading. But that's it. So we have a few more chapters to go, and I will see you guys in class and in another video. Adios.